So what is your strategy? So in 2018, we worked with a large hospitality and travel company that was modernizing. And when the project started, I remember the client kept saying, our goal is to replace the legacy software, which in this case was a reservation management platform. And finally, I just asked the questions, well, what changes are you trying to realize by replacing the software? And this is the what are your strategy? What is your strategy? What are your goals? That's that question, right? And so believe it or not, this is actually a problem that a lot of clients are dealing with. And I think it's because it's easier for people to focus on what they think a solution should be rather than why they need a solution. And so when asked, they couldn't actually articulate a meaningful strategy and goals, even though they had a really strong narrative of the need for modernization. And that isn't to say at all that the legacy system wasn't causing problems, right? I'm not going to be that guy, don't nail me to the wall. But modernization is important. What we see a lot of the times, and I'm sure you've heard about this all this week, is that these legacy systems created like a bloated workforce. In this example, for this client, is they had a bloated workforce that required them to deal with system limitations, right? Like someone's job who literally was to take documents from this part of the organization and then reformat them so they can upload them as a CSV, right? That's the kind of things we're dealing with. Heavy reliance on IT, high licensing fees, right? All this like severely limits business capability. But when your strategy is replacing software, you're just putting lipstick on a pig, okay? Replacing software often becomes rebuilding it. Continuing to inherit legacy models of working or maintaining the status quo. And I'll get into this later, but like literally all the requirements become, I need to be able to do all the things I did before in the legacy system. So all the requirements are based on what they already have. So you're really just maintaining status quo there. Replacement often means inheriting the constraints of the previous system in that case. And then so what happens is the business continues to serve the system rather than the system serving the business. And so, so again, what is your strategy? And I like this, this quote from Stephen Bungay, and he says, strategy is a deployable decision-making framework, enabling action to achieve desired outcomes, constrained by current capabilities, coherently aligned to existing context, which is like, right? But I just keep bringing it back to this. It's a proven and repeatable problem-solving protocol. You're going to see this slide a couple more times. I really like how writer Melissa Perry, she wrote the book, The Build Trap, which is a great book. She simplifies that by saying, strategy is a framework that allows me to figure out where I am now, where I want to go, and how to align those two things. So at BP3, we like to start with a goal alignments workshop. And this is where we have leadership define the vision for where they want to be in 5 years, right? And then next, we call out the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are impacting their ability to get to where they want to be. And then we form some kind of short-term SMART goals for the business units and product teams that we believe will help us move us towards our vision today. And this, I really want you to understand how important goals really are, because this is so important, and there's some science to this. So goals affect how we perceive the world around us, because we actually perceive a world of tools and obstacles based on subjective context. And you'll kind of understand that here in this next example. We also see the world as what matters, right? And irrelevance is based on what we've learned to ignore, right? Because it's neither a tool nor an obstacle in that specific context. An example from Professor of Psychology, Dr. Jordan Peterson, he says, imagine I'm late for class and there's this recycling bin in the way. I'm gonna have this like immediate emotional reaction, like, what idiot put this here, because in that moment, it's not a recycling bin, it's an obstacle. And it's an obstacle to my current goal of getting to class. If it's not in my way, well, then it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to my goal. So now pay attention to this video.
The players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla?
Did you see the gorilla? Right, here we go. This is interesting, right? So looks like 83% saw the gorilla. Some people didn't. All right, so originally, in this famous experiment, this is actually an experiment by Daniel Simmons, and it was later named the invisible gorilla. And only half of people saw the gorilla. About 90% of people believe they would see or notice something that's important or distinctive or unusual come into their field of view. Later, eye tracking studies that they did on this same experiment showed that people who missed the gorilla looked at it for up to a second. All right, looks like we have 74-26 split. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Andy, I would say Zoom might have messed you up a little bit there with its video lag, but overall, I think that you had a lot of people not see that gorilla. So
yeah,
we did get.
So go ahead.
We did get some good questions in the chat for you before you go any further. One of them is how are goal alignment workshops working during the pandemic? How are people able to get their goals aligned during a pandemic?
So we run virtual workshops, just like we run virtual design sprints. We use tools like Zoom, we use tools like Mural in order to facilitate those meetings. And basically they don't work, they work a lot better in person, personally, just because, you can actually stand next to somebody if you need them to be quiet or anything like that. But they still are actually really effective over Zoom. You just really want to make sure that you get everyone bought into that process.
Are people finding that they're able to articulate their actual goals during this time? Or is there a lot of, depending on the pandemic?
I think we do get some of the depending on the pandemic. And, early on in the pandemic, I think people wanted to be able to say, they wanted to be able to kind of articulate their goals as if it wasn't happening. Mm-hmm. And then later come back to say, well, this is real, this is happening, and it's going to be around for a while, right? So, I think it depends on the team, and it really depends on what your strategy is and whether it's affected by the pandemic. But I think that reevaluating your goals when circumstances change, and that's actually something I'm going to talk about later, is what is the process for all this and how does this actually fit into our product development lifecycle?
Yeah, and then one more question we've gotten is, how is this different? So these goal alignment workshops where you're coming out with strategy how does it differ from actual strategy consulting, thinking Bain or BCG?
I think we're a lot more focused on, I can't speak to the way that those kinds of companies would do some kind of strategy alignment. Our focus is not to come up with the best company strategy in the world that is, untouchable. It's really just to come up with something for this part of the process, because it's iterative. You're constantly reevaluating the goals, and it's not about, I always say that design thinking and this kind of strategy is not about being right. It's about setting the right direction. And that's really the important part. It's not about having an ironclad strategy. It's about having a strategy that helps us set direction. And I'll talk about that here in a second too.
And I'll say, having seen both of those things, strategy consulting firms and your approach is, the idea is it's not set in stone. This is changeable, but this is something that we're going to take steps towards. Whereas when you see one of those big strategy consulting companies leave, they're leaving you with a binder and they say, good luck, and there's no road to implementation. So I would say there's a lot of, you come up with a lot of roads to implementation, how we're going to get this done, what iterative development steps we're going to be taking. So,
right. It's about making something that's actionable. So Dr. Simmons, who did that project, that experiment, says, looking isn't the same as seeing. We have to focus attention on something in order to become aware of it. And he goes on to say that the failure to notice people in gorilla suits is actually just a natural product of something we do well, which is, and important to us, which is focus our attention. And we need to be able to filter distractions in our world in order to do the tasks we're trying to do, which has an implication not only on user experience, but also our goals. And we don't have an unlimited amount of attention to devote to other things. And we only see the things that we focus our attention on. So really, like, what am I trying to say with all this, right? And I'm trying to bring it together to say that without shared goals, we don't know where to put our attention. We aren't aligned on what matters, and we can't distinguish between obstacles and opportunities, which is really important. Even worse, if everyone has different goals, then what you end up seeing is everybody pulling in different directions, and we all go nowhere, or just we go somewhere really slowly, but that's very unclear. And I think this is, something Scott and Lance said the other day, is framing problems or questions affect everything. And so the typical response I've seen to that problem is more pressure on product teams to deliver faster. It's like, well, we're not delivering anything, faster, 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 faster. And the actual problem is something I call alignment churn. When you can't get aligned, you're not going to get the right problem solved to move the needle for the business. And that, in fact, is the largest operational obstacle that everyone is dealing with. So to kind of give some weight to what I'm talking about, in 2015, there was this paper published by the IEEE called Why Software Projects Failed. And they estimated that $1 trillion a year was spent on IT software projects. And that number since then is probably only going up. Of which those projects, 15% are abandoned. And they estimate that these projects make up for around 5% of company revenue. Of the work done by development, they estimate that 50% is avoidable rework. And that rework costs 100 times more to fix after the fact. This might be things like, having to change architecture, for instance. So the contributing factors cited were things like unrealistic, unarticulated project goals, poorly defined requirements, poor communication between stakeholders, development, users, stakeholder politics, right? And I imagine a lot of you are experiencing these things. We actually have a poll about this. So, which of these issues, do you find yourself dealing with? And I think you can actually multi-select on this one, right, Krista?
Yeah, this is a multi-select poll because I have, different organizations that I've been in, I would select multiple of these. Even organizations that I volunteer with, like, you can see these kinds of problems, so. Go ahead and roll about 5 more seconds on this.
Okay, this is blocking my presenters here. Here we go. So because of this, I basically say for teams that are dissatisfied with long development cycles, projects that aren't adding business value, circular discussions, or simply tired of playing it safe and not actually innovating their business, I say this is why you need UX. Okay. It looks like the poll is done. Awesome. Yeah, okay, so like most people are dealing with this. Right, okay, so, say what?
It's pretty across the board, but of course, poor communication between stakeholders, development, and users is going to be number one.
Right, definitely. So in a report commissioned by IBM, they asked Forrester to measure the impact of their design thinking program. And initiatives. And for those of you who don't know about this, IBM basically spent a lot of effort planting designers in all corners of their business for years now. And what they found is that IBM achieved a return on its investment by 301%, which I think is amazing. They say that they saved 20.6 million with accelerated projects. They say that 18.6 million increase in portfolio profitability. They claim that they were able to deliver to the market twice as fast. They reduced design time, and design time can be considered as, getting requirements, figuring out what the actual solutions can be, by 75%. This has to do with that churn that we talked about. Reduced development time by 33%, and in total have experienced a benefit of $48.8 million. And I think that's a big deal. I mean, that's a company the size of IBM, but that's still a lot of money. And so qualitatively, the impact, you can see, directly correlates to our contributing factors. And we can talk about the ways UX helps with this, but empowered, engaged, happy workforce, right? Improved collaboration and business strategy. Employees think creatively without fear, stakeholder buy-in, departmental alignment. This is like this is the kind of benefit that we see. And so, I know that was like a bit of a detour, but it's an important one, I think. And I just believe that we need to shift our thinking about goals and not groan when, there's somebody who asks, well, what's the goal here? We need to focus less on actually hitting the goals and more on their utility for setting direction. So in the case of that reservation management system that I was talking about earlier, we did a goal alignment workshops and we produced much higher goals than we had before, as you can see. So original goal, replace the legacy software. The 3 highest priority goals that came out of that alignment workshop were reduce call handle time by 15% while maintaining service levels, reduce reliance on partners by 20% while maintaining or increasing revenue, and reduce system training time by half. That is something I can work with. These goals then became the lens we use to focus our attention on what actually matters from our research. And additionally, this kind of goal creation creates accountability that now we have to measure the outcomes to determine whether or not what we built is going to help us meet our goals. So we're going to send out a poll here about how confident do you feel in your product and design development process. So while we're doing that, I'm going to say that the next most important ingredient of a successful product design is buy-in on process, and not just any process, an effective process. An effective process in our point of view, it has a bias towards action. It invites experimentation. It optimizes for shared learning, and it favors evidence over opinions, right? So this goes back to using data. And we don't say facts because there are no facts. There's really just evidence to support, it's a strong inference towards what we want. All right, so I'll move on here. And so,
the overwhelming majority here is, or not overwhelming, but a majority of people they have some practice, but not enough. Second place is they're on the path, but they have some work to do. Very few people have seen the light, so.
I want to know who those people are. All right, great. So this is awesome. Here we go. Okay, and so how much we love process at BP3, and we have a process to the process, right? So how about that? We have a proven and repeatable problem-solving protocol in order to get our designs. This is the way we work to design successful products, and it's something like this. Our process, like I talked about in design thinking, is not always the same, right? Sometimes it depends on what you learn. In this first section, we do what we already talked about, right? We align on strategy and product and business goals. Next, we do discovery. Now, using a multidisciplinary approach, we do research by like basically casting a wide net to understand the problem space and kind of explore all the dark corners. But while we're doing that, we're using our product goals that we discovered in that first section as the lens by which we can identify opportunities to lead inquiry. There's a lot of ways that this could go. I believe you've heard people talking about process mining this week. That's one method, right? So getting data that, doing a data analysis with, in conjunction with process diagrams and journey maps could be one way of finding opportunities. Using what we learn, we define UX goals and form hypotheses on how we can move our product and business goals. Then we iterate on designs. This is actually where we start creating stuff, creating ways to test our ideas until we arrive at a solution that we feel confident can affect the change that we're looking to make. And I should add that during this design process, for us, because we're working with operational systems, right? Sometimes there's some architecture that there's a very heavy investment in and that cannot be replaced, right? There is this very tight relationship with development, and usually with an architect or someone of that nature, in order to ensure that what is being designed is actually feasible and can be built, or within a reasonable time frame, for instance. From there, the designs are handed to development, shown here as a black box. And in my view, because if we have an agile process, there shouldn't be any codependency between our process over our processes for design and development, other than to have a full backlog. And then when something gets released, here you can see measure. It's measured, right? The impact of what we delivered is measured, and that data feeds into another iteration of product development. And this is kind of like that follow-up that we talk about. This is the follow-up that leads to the more foresight, being able to kind of be able to get a better idea of what we need to do for our future, and better to take informed action with the right focus. So in this kind of process, we actually want to make the shift from thinking about requirements to talking about constraints. And the big key difference is being that when defining if we're not defining a solution in advance, right? Requirements are usually based on assumptions. One, those assumptions aren't always right. And two, they usually maintain the status quo, right? But instead what we want to do is define guardrails, and what we definitely can't do through talking about constraints over requirements. And that kind of allows us to explore what's possible rather than re-inheriting issues. So an example is in this project I was working on, where the business defined a requirement of a legacy system the legacy system had a capability that when you uploaded a file, there was also a checkbox to be able to send that file to an accounting system. And when we interviewed users, they found that not a single user knew what that capability was. And when explained, they didn't even need to use it, right? So it's requirements. We don't want to re-inherit things that we don't need to build. That's more development time than we don't need. So anyways, in the case of the reservation management system that we were talking about, we used the articulated SMART goals to focus on what mattered. So during our research phase, we performed interviews and observational studies to understand what contributing factors were impeding the goals, right? So we knew what our goals were, and we were doing that research. So specifically call handle time and training. So during our research, we learned that most of the reason training took so long is because call center employees had to have a near encyclopedic knowledge of product and services in order to navigate parts of the system. And then, according to call center agents, the leading cause of call center call times was the result of customers having to wait while agents ran searches in the system. And it wasn't a performance problem, it was actually a process and UX problem. And so based on that, we formed hypotheses on designs we believed could resolve these issues and help us meet the goals of, and move our goals. So really the way you would expect the process to look like is more like this. This isn't an exact explanation, right? But the point is that we use what we learn from the outcomes to determine what the next right thing to do is for the business and the product. And ROI is going to be related to that measurement. If our goal is to reduce call handle time, well then we're going to measure call handle time, and how we measure that up against the goal is going to determine our ROI. The common problem I've seen is that clients think they can just start doing everything at once, right? Do all the things. And there's some kind of discovery period where they often already defined what they want. This is kind of that requirements mentality. And then design and development begin to work in tandem. And the problem with that is that there usually isn't enough information to get started, and then development is waiting on design, and there ends up being this like requirements churn because we're still figuring things out as we go, and that can end up in rework for development and a whole slew of other problems. So the reason this works well with Agile is because we're focusing on solving smaller problems at a time. We're clarifying how those problems need to be solved well before development begins, and packaging that as incremental value so development doesn't have to figure that out, right? Development isn't responsible for figuring out anything. They get to focus on what they're good at, which is building reliable, maintainable, and high-performing software. I wanted to highlight also that aside from strategy and goals, UX helps create alignment through design artifacts. These are things that are used throughout the process. And things like workshops, right? Workshops help minimize discussion, right? They surface the best ideas, they eliminate the loudest voice in the room problem. That is a huge win. Wireframes, right? So being able to get some kind of representation of what that solution might look like gives stakeholders something concrete to react to instead of this oftentimes like very ethereal conversation up here. And when you're having those ethereal conversations, what I'm saying when I'm describing it might not match to what you're hearing and how you perceive it when you're hearing that, right? So it creates less mincing of meaning and better alignment. And then journey maps and personas, right? So those kinds of give us stories, stories that we can agree on like who are we talking about and what are their issues that they're facing. Because of this, I like to say that UX designers have learned how to UX the product development cycle in order to create better user experiences for product teams, right? So that's really important, is that process and that way that we build products also needs to be efficient. So anyways, the last thing that and it's the hardest one, like I talked about, is a supportive culture. And there isn't much more I can say about this topic, honestly, because it's a big topic on its own and it takes time to figure out. But really, we want to have a supportive culture that comes where we're valuing outcomes instead of outputs. Comfortable navigating uncertainty is a huge one. Growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and focused on delivering values for customers. So just another way of thinking about this is, what's the difference between a project and a product? Well, a project has outputs where a product has outcomes. Creating stuff versus, it's the difference between when you have a project, the goal of a project manager is to create stuff, right? It's more of this mercenary mindset of let's go in there, get it done, and then deliver, the outcome or the output, really. Whereas with products, where product managers are focused on, did I solve the problem? It's more missionary. It's more in service of the problem and based on some set of goals.